So, welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Nick Halla. Now, Nick has been at the forefront of the food tech revolution, joining Impossible Foods back in 2011, where he had a fantastic 10-year riding the wild waves of the alternative protein market. And Nick, I know I've tried for many years to get you on, so I've managed to reel you in. So thanks so much for joining and coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I'm excited to be here. And yes, it's definitely been a long time coming. So I'm really looking forward to chatting.
No, great stuff. And maybe let's take it all the way back. Thinking about early upbringing and some of the kind of key forces that really helped shape some of your kind of ideas and, I suppose, values.
Yeah, so my early life, I grew up in a dairy farm in the Midwest of the US in southern Minnesota. And a lot of what I do today is still linked to that. I haven't really left the food and agriculture world. I've tried many times, but it keeps luring me back. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that really have stuck with me from that. One is, as a small family dairy farm, it is a form of entrepreneurship. It's a very different form of entrepreneurship than, say, the Silicon Valley style. It is a form of entrepreneurship where you are, building a business. Everybody's pitching in, whether it's your family, your neighbors, extended family, business partners, and then you are trying to get a business to run with very little control in your pricing because it's all commodity based, and also the weather, which you have no idea what's going to happen. And then you essentially have to make a business run with very little capital, and so you get super innovative, super creative. In order to make systems work, which I think has lasted with me for a long time. And all my brothers and sisters, they all have their own business of some sort too. So I think it's kind of in my blood at this point in time, my entire family. And secondarily,
I never realized that. How many generations back in the family does it go?
I mean, a long time. I was going through some of my family history with my mom recently, but yeah, my parents came over, I think it was late, our great, some long in the genealogy, the 1800s, families came over from more of the Bohemian area of Europe. And so farm families from there, and my mom and my dad's family are both from my home county. And I think all my grandparents are one of at least 10 kids or more. And so, it is the big farm family community that's been there. It seems like probably for a long, long, long time.
When did you realize you weren't going to spend your career on the farm?
Probably middle school.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of fun stuff about farming, but it's a hard life, especially dairy farming. I mean, you work 365 days of the year too. There's not really a term vacation. It's like a vacation's going to Minneapolis and going to a Twins game, watching a baseball game, and coming home that night, or maybe staying in a hotel for a night. And it's what, I think I can do something with a bigger impact. And the other part that I think I really gained from the farm is a deep appreciation and an excitement for sustainability in the environment.
Okay. Yeah.
Dairy farmer, you're on the land and outside 365 days of the year. And, you see it at a point source perspective, but, don't really see I didn't see the macro anyway, effects of, the agriculture industry, but I did create a really deep connection with the land and the environment. And I always wanted to do something with sustainability. And in high school, I got into more science and technology, and I was like, well, I mean, we're going to run out of oil and gas eventually anyway, so we need to do renewables. And so in the 90s, I was looking at this and say, we should definitely do renewables in this, and this has to be the future. And so I think that also really stuck with me in my entire career too. And I've kind of been on that personal mission, and it's I think I can do something that matters in sustainability. And then the way my parents raised me was hey, it's as long as you try and you put the effort into what you like, that's what matters. It's not about, making a ton of money. It's not about, personal accolades in a lot of ways. It's just put the effort in. If you put the effort in, that's what you can do. Put the effort in the right way. I was okay, I think I've been for sustainability. I really want to do something there. So I kind of owe it to myself and my family and stuff to give it a shot.
Yeah, amazing. So, and this is well before, I suppose, the mission-driven company, right? I mean, in terms of companies really set up to solve the climate issues, and this goes back a long time for you.
It does, and it was a progression to get there. When I went to college, and I went to University of Minnesota, and the big state school in Minnesota, studied chemical engineering, and it was kind of known as the more universal engineering. You could do a lot of different things with, and I really loved chemistry and how those pieces of the worlds came together and that understanding. And I was everything I did undergrad was I did research for 3 years in how to burn exhaust, and mostly diesel exhaust, more efficiently and cleanly. I designed biofuels factories for classes, battery systems, and it was all kind of linked to that sustainability, future state, how we can make it a more sustainable thing. But as a small town farm kid, I had absolutely no idea what to do with that. And I remember looking at all the national labs like Sandia, Lawrence Berkeley, NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and they have all these roles for PhDs. I was like, oh, I've done undergrad research. Let's see if I can get myself into one of these PhD level roles. Yeah, I don't think I ever heard back from any of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like in Minnesota, right? Or
Yeah.
Cargill are there, right? They're big employers, and General Mills are there. So were you always destined at that point? That first role for you at General Mills, right? Was it always more likely you were going to go into the food industry?
Minnesota's education system for chemie is a bit different than most other places too, since you do have Medtronic, Cargill, General Mills, 3M, a lot of product oriented companies, and really just, oil, gas, chemicals and industrials, which a lot of the chemical engineering programs are more tailored to. And so it felt like half the education was, the process stuff and stuff like that. You had much more traditional, but a lot of it was like the product design stuff. And so it's like, how do you build this? And I remember one of my first bosses at General Mills, like he went there and he was there over 30 years. And he went to the University of Minnesota and he went to General Mills, and like the professors like kind of just wrote him off. It's like, why would you ever go do that? That's you're supposed to go and work for the big companies and do this. Why would you go work for a food company? And by the time I was there, that's completely changed, and the ecosystem around it. And so the way that education in Minnesota is one of the top chemie programs in the world too. I think partially because of that. So you get a much more diverse education in a lot of ways, and how you can apply the concepts of chemical engineering into not just industrial process, but even consumer processes and things like this, which then led me to General Mills, where it was my first job. First couple of years were designing products and products packaging manufacturing system, which is cool to be able to see how a product goes from an idea. And I would literally go with the consumer insights people into a consumer's home a couple of times and seeing how they interacted with the products and the packages and things like this. Then you'd kind of do the concept and do consumer testing, and you start making the product, go back into consumer testing, and then you go to the manufacturing floor and start producing it and start delivering it. And it was fascinating to see how that cycle worked. And then for 2 years, I did technology development, which was more really on the manufacturing technology and building better and better manufacturing technology pieces. But at the end of the day, I was like, I get back and I was taking renewable energy classes at night because I was like, that's still my passion. And so I was like, this isn't really hitting what I want to do from a personal mission perspective. Tons of learning, great experience, great company, really family oriented, good culture. But it was, missing the that heart mission that I was really looking for.
Yeah, the heart, the connection with purpose, and the connection with what you wanted to commit your life to, as it were, right? So yeah. So when did you find, the journey to impossible in 2011? So where did you come across kind of Pat Brown then?
Yeah, so when I was, after about 4 years at General Mills, I left and I got myself into business school at Stanford. And even in undergrad, I was looking at potentially doing a business degree along with chemie, because coming from a farm, I always planned on starting my own business at some point in time. That was also kind of part of the personal excitement. I was like, okay, so, I could keep, doing what I'm doing there, but do I really want to just produce, fruit roll-ups and biscuits? I was like, no, I want to do something really different. It's like, and if I can get myself into one of the business schools that has good science and technology and engineering, then I can see can I combine those worlds of like the science, technology, idea phase, and creating businesses that actually matter. And so I came out here for school, focused everything on starting businesses in renewable energy and sustainable technology. Did nothing in food and agriculture at all. And I was actively avoiding it. I was like, my next phase is this. I really want to get into this. And then now I'm in a system where I can have more access. And I remember even being at the school early and looking at all the jobs and internships and things like this. And I'm a farmer engineer. I'd never heard of pretty much any of the companies that were recruiting there in my life. And where most of my classmates came from. And I looked at them, I was like, none of those jobs even look interesting to me. Because what I wanted to do is start a company in sustainable technology and commercializing that. And then I started talking to a lot of the second year students, like, no, just wait till the spring. Here's a few different ways, get into the venture network. So I got really deep in the venture network, where a lot of the more earlier stage science and technology and businesses are incubated, and get into ones that are more sustainability leaning and working on stuff in clean technology. And through that process and through the Stanford Entrepreneurial Summer Program, I got into a solar energy company, which is called Cogenera, that did a solar cogeneration. So you could, capture the electricity, with the PV cell, and you capture the heat behind it and capture a lot more of the energy from the sun as you do this. Cool technology, fun team, learned a ton. Then I tried to start 8 businesses during grad school. And when I was kind of finishing the part of it, one of the venture partners I was talking with was like, I have this perfect idea for you. It's sort of clean tech, clean energy, huge impact, really early, fits your background well, but I can't tell you about it. I was like, all right, well, probably something in food and ag then, since that's essentially what I've done my entire life. Something sustainability, leaning. And then once they invested in Pat, introduced me to him. We met at a cafe in downtown Palo Alto, and we just hit it off. And, I've been in the food industry my entire life. And I'd never heard of people talking about the impact of animal agriculture the way that he did. And you look at the numbers, animal agriculture uses about 45% of the world's land surface, more than 25% of the fresh water each year, the biggest user of fresh water, more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation industry, and by far the biggest driver of species loss. And it's like, no one's working on this. No one's really thinking about how to do it. And as a technology, and animals, like, great at producing products that consumers like to eat, but insanely inefficient. Like a beef cow is about a 3% efficient technology of taking plant-based calories and plant-based proteins, converting them to meat that we eat. It's like, what? And as a technology person and as an engineer, it's like, what technologies exist that are 3% efficient in the world? Very few. And so we hit it off. We hit it off on, how we thought about building a team and these types of values. Like, I don't think we called them values at that point in time, but, we want to work with good people. We want to work hard. We want to work with people that are passionate and really smart. And so I think we just hit it off. And so I ended up joining as his first employee to be his business partner. And then the rest is then it was a 11-year journey.
Amazing. I didn't realize I knew you were right at the beginning. Well, close to that. I didn't realize you were employee number 1. Amazing.
Yeah. So it was me, Pat, and then Jackie, who had joined as well. So that was like Jackie and my first day in the office it's our company anniversary. And so, and it was a great time. I mean, when we're a few people to now, the company's a much, much bigger company, totally different. But the mission, the gold star of the mission has never changed. Our goal at Impossible is to create the most delicious meat, fish, and dairy foods the world's ever had, all directly from plants. And the only way you're going to change a system as big as the animal agriculture industry is to outcompete it. And so we have to create products that consumers and meat lovers and dairy lovers like more and get more utility out of than they get, out of the current system. And so we always had a really high bar, and that's never changed.
Yeah.
And then culturally wise, working with good people and, working as a team and collaboratively, challenging assumptions, knocking down barriers. It's like, a lot of that. It was so fun. Challenging, very challenging, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, how'd you reflect on those 11 years, as it were? Maybe give me a couple of highlights for you. You did roles everywhere around the world and, most different functions. So, when you look back, what gives you real satisfaction?
Yeah, I look at how we jump-started the entire industry, and the way we jump-started the industry with products that taste amazing. And I think we've gotten a lot of the messaging, the branding, and things like this, right about how we positioned it. But it starts with a great product. And I think the fundamentals of really building the science and technology and the product right first, before you really go, I think really set us apart and really gave us an ability to jumpstart an industry the way it is. And then I was in China last summer for a few months, and most of the like venture partners I was talking about was like, there's like 70 to 100 plant-based meat startups in China now.
Is that really? Wow.
And it's like, you see this and it's like, that's great. You have more and more people driven, inspired to, help drive this industry forward too, because there's 750 billion pounds of meat consumed globally every year. It's going to take a lot to, transition that system to plant-based. And it will happen. It's going to take some time, but it will happen. It's just such a better system, and you can create much better products. And so I think with Impossible, it's that you just look at the people we put together. It's like such amazing people with high passion, high skill. It's just super capable, good people too. And just getting to work with like those teams every day in and out for, so many years, and then progressing over time. And I remember taking all the entrepreneurship classes, and they try to start tons of companies. And one of the things they always say is like, okay, as you scale companies, one of the things that always breaks is communication. I was like, all right, I hear that all the time. I'm going to get ahead of it. Communication is not going to break. Oh, got it wrong every time. Because what happens is like you're this, and when you're a 10-person company, the way you communicate versus when you're a 50-person company to 100 to 500, it has to be totally different. And you're always also running day to day on everything. And even when you're thinking about it, you have to change the way you operate so often as you scale to be more efficient. Because when you're small, the efficiency calculation is different, and then when you're big and when you're medium. And so the most efficient, the most successful communication methods and ways you operate as a company do have to morph over time. I think it's really important. The values and the culture have the tenets that stay the same, but a lot of the practices for how they manifest really do adapt and change over time.
Yeah. Is that mainly the internal communications?
Yeah, I would say mainly internal. Yeah, I think, from the external communication side, I mean, Pat is such an amazing visionary and an amazing visionary leader. I think he did a really good job of that. And he's a professor at Stanford for 25 years in the medical school. And he'll kind of tell you how he thinks, for good and bad, but it's very authentic. And so I think from the external side, we always talked about this is we want to be really transparent, really authentic as a company. And so as when Pat, me, and many other leaders, and we had more and more people in the company being spokespeople, which I think was also really good for the culture because it helps create more evangelism opportunities. And because it's not just creating a product, we have to then sell the product in a lot of ways, and the mission and why this matters, what the product is, because of course there's going to be a ton of confusion when there's something completely new. World. And so I think external communication, we scaled many different ways over time. And the internal communication, I think you just have to focus on it. And I mean, we hired people to focus directly on internal communication, which was critical because it is a full-time job plus some, especially as you grow the company.
Yeah. I mean, what a journey it really was. Tell me when you think about the marketplace, or you think about the consumer, how did the marketplace you were selling into, how did that evolve and change over that period of time?
Well, when we started, I remember going to a big food conference that was more like the natural food conference in the US. And I tried and I come from a beef and dairy background. And so at this point I was still eating, plenty of beef and dairy, and I'm vegetarian now, and I am moving more and more towards vegan every year as, products get better too. And I learned essentially how to eat healthy and well that way. So it does take some work to, change some of the habits that I was used to growing up. But I tried all the plant-based meats. I tried all the plant-based dairy products, and I was like, how do people eat this stuff? It was I was just baffled that these were actually products that people consume, because they weren't the experience that I was looking for, that I was used to out of this. And as I did that, then it's okay, so if that's what the world is, and if somebody says, hey, you want to even share half my veggie burger of some sort, I'd say, no, I'm gonna go get something else, probably at that point in time. But I didn't know the environmental impact of that, and all the other aspects, but the product just wasn't what I was looking for. And so when we went to market and we started building the messaging behind Impossible, that was a reality for a lot of people. And so we needed to find a way to differentiate ourselves, that this was not a better veggie burger. This was meat made for plants, meat made for plants, for meat eaters. So, if we went into, the grocery store and put it essentially with all the vegan products in the vegan ghetto in the corner, that's who you're going to get as a consumer. And it's we need to, compete head on head, with meat to be able to have the impact from an environmental perspective, and even the market, really to, convert that over. And so we thought a lot about how to do that. And it just came down to what, I don't think the retail world's the right way to do it. What if we can, blow away the best meat chefs of America with our product? And once we got to that point, we're all right, that's it. Because now essentially we have the taste makers in this category evangelizing for our product, by putting it on their menu and serving it to their meat-loving consumers, which sends a pretty big message. And that helped us, kind of change the narrative what plant-based foods could be.
Great. Yeah. Okay, great. And that seems to be a really good channel and a really good kind of route in, as it were, working with the chefs and getting them in restaurants and getting that kind of advocation from that, from the chefs.
And at that point in time, that was not normal. It's having branded products on menus at restaurants really didn't happen. And, for us, and then as we, start building the channel too, you get questions why would I do that? And it's well, here's the data. Yeah, you put Impossible's brand on the menu, you put the flags in the burgers and things like this that, show this. And it's this is how it drives your sales. And it worked. It worked really, really well. And I remember being at our first launch restaurant a week or two after we launched. And we're like, all right, let's go try this now. And I mean, there was lines for, I think, a couple months essentially trying to get in to get it. There's a table of like 8 people next to us that are probably mid-20s. And once their food came out, it was all Impossible Burgers. I don't think they talked for like 5 minutes. They're all on their phone taking pictures, and like they turn it different ways, certainly on Instagram and other places, and posting on it. And you have the flag in there that says Impossible. And so the brand spread really well due to that, through branding in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And now I've seen a bunch of other, companies kind of follow similar paths, because, and then restaurants also were looking for opportunity, like, oh, this is actually an interesting way to differentiate. Because I mean, the restaurant industry is such a competitive marketplace too. And so it really created a new tool in the food service world to have differentiation within your operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me, you did a lot of work internationally. So, when you think about consumers and you think across the globe, just give us a view on how some of their kind of preferences are evolving and changing.
Yeah, I think food is culture, and food is such a manifestation and representation of culture, and I think we had to always consider that. And I think everywhere you go, you kind of have to look at it as like, it's a new place, you have to look at it and say, okay, and it's like, okay, do you do the exact same thing you did in the US and start the way you did there? And every country you go into is like, no. You have to look at each one. You look at a lot of the same principles. Like, how do you tap into the local food culture to make it accessible, exciting for consumers to try? And then how do you create craveable dishes that, are the ones, consumers are looking for? And so in the US, yeah, it's burgers. I mean, the number of burgers that are consumed in the US are massive. And when we started going to Asia, you start looking more at pork. And when we launched our pork in Asia, it was selling like crazy, and it was great. And the product is amazing. But we were even looking at our beef before we had our pork one, to decide, it's like, how can we make this more locally accessible, locally relevant to consumers? And the good thing about the way we design the product platform is we don't create a burger, we create ground beef from plants. And we don't create, like a meatball, we create, the raw material that goes into that. And so the local chefs and restaurants and things like this can take the raw material, just like they take, different cuts of meat, and make the products that they know their consumers are going to love. And so it was like a kind of a jump start in the local customization without us having to customize things, which then if we had to customize everything for every country, then it's really hard to scale anything.
Yeah.
Create a product that could be customized locally really effectively.
So which countries did you go to then?
Yeah, so the rollout was initially Hong Kong was the first country. There's a really lot of strategic reasons for that. It's a global food center. You have a mix of every single cuisine. We were probably about 500 restaurants that we're serving in the US when we went there, so very early. 44% of meat consumption's in Asia, globally and growing. And so from a mission perspective, it was, very critical. And since all the different, food cultures come, and the fusions of food cultures come together in a place like Hong Kong, we could test and really push the product boundaries. And is our product really ready for something like this? And we learned a ton. And then probably 9 to 12 months after we launched in Hong Kong, we actually launched a new formula of the product that made it much more robust, much more versatile, from a lot of the learnings of what we learned in Hong Kong. Because you do have so many different types of cooking apparatuses, different cuisines. And so it's like, then our team kind of had to learn, like, okay, we got to make this work in more than like the handful of like, US centric cooking options for ground meats. And then it really opened up the market. So it's Hong Kong, Singapore, Canada, and then so it's Hong Kong, Singapore, and then COVID hit, which then of course makes, international expansion tougher. And especially in the food world, a lot of the work to set things up is face-to-face, because food is so culturally tied. But we did launch Canada in 2020. And then last year launched a handful of places, Australia, New Zealand, UAE, and then we've expanded now. Like this year we launched in the UK.
UK as well, right? There was a pop-up, wasn't there, in Covent Garden, I think, a few months ago.
And so we're also looking at that and like, what's the right, price for UK? And there's quite like the chicken shop culture in like London and the UK that I didn't really realize. We kind of launched in that chicken shop culture, which is totally different than anything we've ever done before. And so again, back to like, okay, what is locally relevant with the products that we can bring over? And I did something, and that was kind of like the last foray that I worked with Impossible. We got the UK team built and started the European business, and then did the launch and stuff, and it was a ton of fun.
Great. So you got some fantastic experience internationally over the last number of years. And tell me though, when you think about the customers and the customer base, were they really driven, you think, to try the products initially because of the climate and the animal kind of welfare, climate or animal welfare, or where was the main lever, do you think, in terms of adoption?
I think, I link like even a restaurant somewhat to like a family farm or a restaurant. A lot of it, especially the smaller chains, are family operations a lot of times. And so you are looking for ways to differentiate your business. And a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, the drive of sustainability and really all operations, including the food that you serve, is increasing substantially everywhere. So I think when we first started, it was definitely harder to get that conversation going, because the connection of what food you serve and the environmental sustainability of that really wasn't there very much, very lightly. Now, a few years after we launched that, it totally changed, and I think that's a lot to do with a lot of the advocacy and the communication work that we did, the brand, the products being to the point where, hey, I can have this. It's an amazing product, tastes absolutely delicious, and I don't have to have the drawbacks of the environmental issues behind it, and what is animal welfare, cholesterol, hormones, antibiotics, all these different things that different consumers care about. Like, wow, I can have this. I don't have to give up a compromise on experience and taste and flavor and all this. And like, now I'm open to having that conversation. When you say, oh, go eat, a burger patty that's a bunch of vegetables kind of mashed together, it's really hard to even start that conversation because I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think, and then once we really got going, then the conversation started to take off, and as you can see, the business boomed.
Yeah. And where are we now, do you think? If you think about adoption, you think about the broader alternative protein and consumer preferences, where are we now on the journey?
Still very, very early. I think about most like technology adoption curves and consumer products, and the first thing you have to do is produce products that blow people away, that give them experiences that they love. And that was always the base of Impossible, is we have to deliver the most amazing experiences consumers have ever had. And then what that did is it jump-started an entire like industry around it. Like we were talking about, like the number of companies globally that are doing plant-based foods, plant-based meats has boomed, and probably a bit too much in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of products out there that aren't great. And so I think as a company, you have to really focus on, okay, so what is my differentiation in the market, and what am I offering consumers that gives them an amazing experience, and not just a formulation or not just a brand. And so I think the good thing is there, a lot of money went in, a lot of entrepreneurs were really driven. Now the question is, okay, where does that go? And one thing we were always worried about, and a lot of the technology stuff I've worked on in my career, is you want to have the market led by products that give people those great experiences. And if that doesn't happen, like even my experience back in like, I guess 11 years ago when I first had all the plant-based products, is like, you don't want people to have a bad experience the first time and then turn away. And then it becomes harder. And so some of that's happened because there are, some, mediocre products out there that don't really drive the meat eater, but they might be great products for the vegetarian community, which has, a different flavor set and different taste preferences. So you kind of have to have that right fit. So I think, the market and the industry itself is still very, very early. And I think the next several years, it's going to continue to take off. I think the companies that have the base right from a product business model, stuff like this, I think are really primed to succeed.
Yeah. Because it was such a tumultuous rise, wasn't it, in terms of the marketplace? It really was. Everyone was talking about it. Money was coming in. The whole thing was kind of flying, and it kind of hit buffers a little bit over the last kind of few months with things. What about the investment landscape? You're very well networked in that VC investment community. Do you still see the interest to invest in this space?
There is. As I've talked to investors too, as I'm looking at my next stuff, and I was like, oh, what you really should do is they send me an article on like why like plant-based meat is the thing that's going to solve climate change the fastest. And so I was like, oh, that's good to see. Like, this is one of the big investors too. And I was like, oh, it's good to see. And I sent them some articles that we wrote on. So Pat had written a paper about a year ago that showed essentially if you convert all the globe to a plant-based diet over the next 15 years, which obviously is a very big premise. But if you do that, you reduce the greenhouse gas emissions substantially of the agriculture industry, and you enable the land that you free up, because if you source our human nutrition directly from land instead of using animals, you're much more efficient, so you need less land. And then you let that land grow back up with biomass, you could flatline greenhouse gases for 30 years. and buy us 30 years of time to solve, everything else. And it's like such a powerful thing we could do now. Now, changing consumers, and industry and production, all the systems that fast is obviously a big undertaking, but it's a huge opportunity. And, there's a lot more and more consumers globally are looking for sustainable solutions, better solutions. And as products get better, it's like many of like Impossible's products and blind taste tests are preferred over meat. And so it's like, we're not stopping at like, I say, hey, we caught up to meat. It's like, oh, great. We're going to get better and better. And I think that's kind of the fun part about the plant-based landscape is we're not limited by, what the animal's body can do. You can do so many different things that consumers actually are almost certainly going to like better. I do see investors. I think, there's obviously a slowdown in global investment across the board right now, and any ideas, and, plant-based being certainly one of those, but there's still, quite a bit happening.
Yeah. It always strikes me that sometimes you get these markets where there's so much hype, they get pumped up and they get valued so high, and the expectations become through the roof. And then where do you go from there, basically? You just want to be under the radar a little bit, maybe.
That's funny. I'll use like an example. Before I was even at Impossible, I was in solar energy. And I think when I was working in solar energy, there's like 200 solar energy companies in California. And I was like, okay. And then, silicon prices went way down. The clean tech, that bubble kind of burst some, and some of the investment went out. Several companies exited, many went out of business. But then, a couple years later, and now you look at today, the solar industry has boomed because the fundamentals got there. Prices came down, the infrastructure got set up, the technology advanced where you needed to, and then the industry itself just accelerated. Now the number of companies are tiny compared to what they were, back in 2009, 2010. But the industry got set up for success, and in that industry, you kind of had to have some of that weeded out. So then the ones that had the right business models, technology, and ability to scale were there, and they really took off.
Yeah, interesting.
It happens in so many industries.
Yeah, absolutely. So exciting times ahead for this industry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Tell me, what's your view on, if you were thinking about the journey with Impossible, the journey with alternative protein, and you see some of the cultivated meat companies that are now, we saw yesterday, actually, Upside Foods had a FDA approval, in the US. And so as these companies now start marketing and start bringing their products to market, well, any advice for, it's like, again, new industry, new sector, any advice or any thoughts around how those companies could succeed?
Yeah, I think you have to find your market niche of, where consumers are interested and what that value proposition is to them. It's like, I do see, some companies out there that have products that are kind of, whether it's me 2, me 3, me 10. And it's okay, so then what is your value proposition that, really is going to drive the consumer? And so that typically starts first with taste and experience, because that's number one in food, is always taste and experience. And that's why, food is so ingrained in culture too. It's all about the experience and how you connect with your food, with people, in events, things like this. And so you have to have something and say, okay, our product delivers this, that's not there now. And then you look at that and say, okay, depending on what that, calculation is or what that is, okay, what is the right way to start reaching your early adopters? There's always for all technologies and all products, and really essentially any company, it's you do look at the early adopter curve and say, okay, if we build successful case studies here, that leads to this, and that opens up this, if you try to create that flywheel effect.
Yeah. Have you tried any of those products?
I don't think I have. Yeah, no, not any of the cultured meat ones. I've tried a bunch of other products too. Yeah.
And I mean, are you as bullish for that sector as you are for the the broader plant-based sector?
I'm much more bullish on the plant-based sector just based on cost and scalability as much as anything else. I think and I do this, like, I've been in agriculture and processes for a long time. You have to look at, okay, what can you scale at a cost? I think if you create a high value output with a low amount of use in a product that is unique, that you can only really get that way, or the best way to get it is that way, then I think there's some valid validity there. The challenge is if you're trying to create like a full product that way. So it's a very expensive technological system versus like going to a field down the street and farmers are growing different crops, and you pull the proteins in oils and nutrients out of the crops and things like that. You're using the sun, you're using the land, you're using the rain. And so you kind of have to compete against that from a direct perspective, especially as your main components.
Yeah.
And so you saw this even like in an industry like the biofuels industry. So biofuels, all the companies were trying to do, biofuels that compete with oil. Oil got too low in price, but then they held technology and strain development and things like this. Many pivoted to flavors and fragrances in food and cosmetics.
Yes.
Because technology was more essentially akin to a value proposition and a technology cost for that market than it was for, doing a biofuel at the end of the day. And so I think as you think about scaling this technology is, okay, where can you drive a high value with, what you can do initially? Because the costs certainly are going to be much higher than using plants. And probably potentially in perpetuity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been incredible the amount of companies now that, if I think about the last 5-10 years that have worked or are bringing novel molecules or novel ingredients to the marketplace as opposed to the more broader commodity set, which does beg the question, when you think about where we are on the journey and, the whole climate emergency. And we've seen so much stuff out there over the last few weeks about, the warming and it doesn't look like we're going to be able to kind of, keep it to 1.5 degrees over the next 10 years or so, I think it is, right? So, what do you think needs to happen? And how can we get there?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been with the the climate change summit going on over the last 10 days, more and more stuff coming out on that and saying, many people say 1.5 Celsius it's just not going to happen. You just look at the trends, we keep falling further behind the emissions goals to hit 1.5 C, and it's really more trending from a lot of the data that I see to 2.8 to 3 C, which is almost essentially double of what the target has been. And it's like, okay, if that is the reality of what we're seeing out of how fast we can decarbonize and transition these industries, what else can we do? And so that was a lot of my premise as I was starting to transition out of Impossible. Is like I looked at this and said, okay, what if we can do what we did at Impossible, jumpstart an entire industry, with great products and success, and do it on directly tackling climate change in the other direction, and saying, okay, the emissions are still going to happen, but after the emissions, what can we do to whether it's capture, convert CO2, methane, nitrous oxide into other stuff. Even in some stuff, I've been doing a lot of work in things like methane because it's a much more high energy molecule. It's a much more useful molecule. And at a 20-year period, it's 82 times more potent as a greenhouse gas. And you don't necessarily even need to capture it. So if you can react it into something more inert, it's a pretty big impact on the environment. And it's a big part of the climate equation, especially if you look at it as a 20-year system. And the way I think about it is every time you can buy yourself time and speed up, and that even comes to like the Impossible, or into like Pat's paper that he wrote on, transitioning plant-based, or essentially transitioning agriculture to plant-based. It's like biomass is the best, biomass and biology is the best way to capture CO2. It's been doing it for millions of years, right? And so if you can enable that, that's probably the best way to capture CO2 in the short term. And then, other stuff, I think there's other things. And so I think we need to keep tackling it. The optimistic side of this is, I mean, I've been, even working, you talk to people, and there's so many people that want to work in this. So many young people are so driven by helping, fight climate change, whether it's consumer in their own home and in their own daily practices to, working on it. I think we'd have thousands of applicants for jobs pretty frequently. And it's like people are like, yeah, this is fascinating. I want to be part of the solution. And so I think the amount of energy going into it, the number of companies, the amount of actually investment too, it's like a lot of climate investment is still doing quite well, within this sphere, which I think is really encouraging. And you have governments supporting it more. You have the IRA bill in the US, that is doing a lot to decarbonize and incentivize these industries to continue to take off. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Now, I think we have to take a bunch of approaches from every single direction. There's not going to be like a silver bullet that solves this. It's going to be 100,000, 10,000 bullets. I think that we need to, solve this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is, it's an incredible generational change with people in the workplace and around how many people want to dedicate themselves to solving or working on these problems. And this never happened 15 years ago, 12 years, even when I was first started working in this space in 2013, 2014, there weren't that many companies. It was a really, really small space, it has grown so quickly, and there have been so many more. The whole ecosystem has grown incredibly, and people want to dedicate themselves to it. So it's very exciting to partner and work and see people that want to dedicate their careers to this.
Totally. And I even think about this from like when we started with Impossible, I tell people like we were stealth for quite some time, but I tell people high level what we're doing. I get a lot of raised eyebrows. You're doing what? Why would you do that? And now you think about that and working in like, the future food industry and agriculture and stuff, and you get totally different response to that. Right. And that's, in a decade, it's changed that much. And it probably changed really within about 5 years. And it's continued to. I think in a lot of the climate work, you're starting to see the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, I could talk to you all day about this. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your journey and sharing your thoughts on this. Super appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.